This makes me want to dance. Good morning, King of Kings. It is good to be with you today. Hey, a couple of house cleaning items. I don't charge a small fee, Mike White. I don't roll the way that you do. It's free if you want a signed copy. But hey, it's good to be back with you. I had a couple of people ask me and say, we didn't know that you were an offensive lineman on Michigan. I don't know if you watched the game, but that is not me. That's Zehnder. And he got hurt, and we're praying for him. I do have all affinity for all the ZZs out there because I know how life is so difficult for us. But I am not a Michigan lineman, and I have nothing and want nothing to do with Michigan outside of the relatives I have there and some chicken in Frankenmuth that's really good. No, I am a Nebraskan, and I'm excited to be a Nebraskan. When I said that, it didn't really land on good ears the last 11 years in Florida, but I am happy to be back in the Sea of Red, and there are good things coming, even if we got to wait a little bit longer. Things are on their way. Secondly, last housekeeping item is, you know, when you come into a church for the first time, there are certain people and staff that will tell you certain things about each of the services, 8, 9, and 11, and what to expect. And I just want you to know, I'm making my own judgments. And so I don't have a favorite yet between 8 a.m. Classic Grace, 9 a.m., and 11 a.m. And I know God has no favorites, but I can have a favorite. And so I want to know, the way you're going to be favorite is, are you going to participate with me? Can we get a little energetic in this place? Can we be responsive in this place? When God is stirring, can we get all excited about that and encourage one another? I'm just saying, the jury's still out. And I heard what they've been saying about 11 o'clock, and I want to tell them, you're wrong. Because that's my favorite. But we'll see. We'll see. Hey, welcome back to week 2 of Forgiving Challenge. Our prayer, and we really believe that this will be a 40-day life-changing journey leading to your freedom. And Mike's right, it's not too late to step in. We're on day 6, but really the first 5 days are really introductory, so you can catch up really quickly to where we are today. The premise of this series is that though Christ has come to set the captives free, of which you and I are, that there are even a lot of Christians, those of us in name, that adhere to Christ, that for whatever reason don't feel the freedom that God gives to us, don't always experience the freedom that He's already won for us. Some of us are still bound up in chains that we didn't think we'd still be carrying around all these years later. And so we're doing a deep dive into God's grace in order to hopefully bring us the real and perfect freedom that God wants you and I to live in. I don't want to settle, and I know you don't either, for a broken down, half-hearted, manage my sin until I die sort of representation of Jesus, when He has died and given me life and life to the fullest. And I want that for you too. And so where we're going in this series, I said last week, it's a 6-week sermon. So last week, we were just like driving to the restaurant and looking at the menu, and now we're getting into the 5 courses today. You can see the 5 phases leading to freedom, and today's is the first one. It's sin. And you're like, Zach, that's not a course that tastes very good. So I'm going to call this Brussels sprouts week, right? We're going to have an appetizer of Brussels sprouts. And I hated Brussels sprouts as a kid, but now I kind of like them. Of course, you got to add some butter and cheese and all the good stuff to them, but aren't they pretty good now as adults? Right? And so, like, I couldn't handle this message when I was a kid. It didn't taste right. When I'm immature, it might not feel right. But if you're mature and if you're confident in your faith, I think God's even going to show us this can taste pretty good too. Because my goal today is twofold: to convict you. Not to condemn, by the way. There's a difference. To convict you and then to encourage you. To convict you and then to encourage you. So we're going to look at that word sin. It's a small word that packs a mighty punch. It's a loaded word. We're going to define it a little bit later on. But first, what we're doing in this series is we're looking specifically, if we're going to learn forgiveness from anybody, let's learn it from the Master Jesus Himself. And so we're looking at how does Jesus forgive? And my favorite story of forgiveness is how He forgives Peter. So we're diving deep into Peter's story. And so today is twofold. I want to introduce you, some of you may already know him pretty well, to this man Peter and to his sin. And then as we sit in Peter's sin, we'll hopefully be able to sit in ours as well. In fact, Peter, that's what Peter's life is kind of meant for us to do. In literary terms, Peter is known as the foil to the lead character. So a foil is a supporting character whose part contrasts, highlights, or even exalts the qualities of the lead character. And so we know in our story in the Bible who the lead character is. It's Jesus. And so what we see in Peter is he's going to highlight, exalt, and contrast Jesus. And so we're going to see beautiful things about Jesus. But because he's a foil, we should also see ourselves in Peter. And so today, we're going to meet the foil who's known for an epic fail. We know a lot about Peter because Peter's written a lot about in the Bible. In fact, many scholars argue that Peter is the only other fully developed character in all of the Gospels outside of Jesus. His name is mentioned 200 times in the New Testament, more than 5 times that of any other disciple of Jesus. But the first moment, we want to go all the way back to when Jesus meets Peter. He actually goes by a different name at that point. Do you know what it is? Simon. And Simon is on a boat with his dad Zebedee, a great Z name if you're looking for baby names. Zebedee and his brother and some family. And by all means, this was his life. I mean, this was what he was going to do. He was going to be a fisherman. It was a family vocation. It was his calling. It's where he was going. And in Matthew's gospel, when Jesus first sees Simon, he calls him Simon, son of Jonah. But immediately, without doing anything to earn a new name, Jesus declares that from now on, Simon, you will be called Cephas, translated Peter. And we know that Peter, Petros, means the rock or big boulder. And so before we go any further in the story, I like the fact, by the way, that before Peter does anything, Jesus gives him a new name. You see, many times in the faith we get it wrong and think that God will only love us and accept us and help us if we prove ourselves that we are worthy of his love and acceptance. And some of us go our whole lives fighting for God's approval. But what you need to see from the beginning is you don't need to do anything to make God love you. He already does. He already does. And you may think, well, certainly if Peter, didn't do anything, he was probably just in a special category of people. But the more you look at Peter's story, you see he really nothing really stood out about him. Pastor Adam Hamilton wrote a book about Peter and said this. He said, in the Jewish population, there was a class of people going back hundreds of years before the time of Jesus and Peter, and they were called the Ha-Hamarets. And the phrase literally means the people of the land. The term has an interesting history, but by the time of Peter, it meant people who were poor, uneducated, lower class, and particularly people that were not careful in their observance of the law. Acts 4:13 would verify this and would call Peter an unschooled and ordinary man. And so here we have an unschooled, ordinary man that Jesus selected out of obscurity, even a man that didn't really adhere to the law. Like, that's kind of a crazy pick. But God saw something in Peter. And just as God saw something in Peter, I want you to see today, he sees something in you too. He sees in you what you can be and who you can be, regardless of who the world says you are and regardless of who sometimes you tell yourself that you are. One of the most popular TV shows out there is this singing reality show called The Voice. How many of you have watched The Voice before, or at least know what The Voice is? It's quite a bit of the hands in the room. And there were singing reality shows before The Voice, but this one had a unique twist. You see, in most other singing reality shows, someone would sing, but the way they looked or how vibey they were or if they had the it factor, you know what I'm talking about? Sometimes those things would be more important to the judges than the actual vocal talent and ability of the singer. And so what makes The Voice unique is there's a round called the blind audition round. And in the blind audition round, the contestants sing, but they're singing to 4 backs of chairs. And the judges are in those chairs. And as they start singing their heart out, it's their big moment. The musical legends, depending on who they are and what they think of them, if they like what they're hearing, they hit this big red button and their chair turns around. And then in neon lights on the bottom is this phrase in all caps, I want you. And what a cool moment for these aspiring artists to have some of the greatest musical talents in our generation to say, sight unseen, you've got a voice that I want to commit to. I'm in agreement with Pastor Stephen Furtick, who writes about the voice in his book, Crash the Chatterbox, and he says, it's the blind audition round that really makes the best TV in this show. It's intense, isn't it, to see somebody singing her heart out for a panel of judges who may or may not choose her? And the show gets fun when all 4 judges turn around. And then you start hearing these musical giants arguing with one another and talking about this artist. And depending on the season, you've got people like Blake Shelton and Shakira. And I think I saw Ariana Grande is on this season. And Usher, they're all like kind of arguing over who has discovered the next Bieber, or if the world is really ready for this jelly. And this argument goes on and on and on. And these 4 musical giants are fighting over this previously unknown aspiring artist. That's pretty cool to see. But the show's hard when no chairs turn around. Ew. That's depressing. Nobody's choosing this person. No lights are shining. Nobody's box says, I want you. Instead, reality creeps in and you're going back home, rejected. Back to singing YMCA at your cousin's wedding in Fremont, Nebraska. And I got nothing against Fremont, by the way. But I just think that most of us go through our lives like these contestants go through these blind auditions. We're just waiting on someone to hit a button, someone to tell me that they love me, that they're proud of me, that they think I have what it takes. And we furnish in our minds these people and put a figurative button in front of them and think that we have to do something to get them to turn around, to show me and to tell me that I'm worth it. And the panel of judges may vary from person to person in this room, but our driving motivation is the same. I think we're all trying to escape the self-inflicted prison of insecurity we find ourselves in. And we need someone from the outside to just hit a button to tell me I'm okay. And I don't know who's in your chairs. Maybe for you it's a parent, and you were longing to hear those words as a son of, I love you, I'm proud of you, you have what it takes. Or you're a daughter and you were longing to hear those words of, you are lovely and beautiful. Maybe for you it's not parents, maybe it's your boss, and it's like, when will she notice me? I'm putting in all this work and I deserve the promotion. When will she notice me? Maybe for you, it's the cool kid at school. It's like, if he ever got to know me and invited me to one of his parties, everything would change in that moment. And what's sad about this is that none of these people actually have a button to hit. And if they did, many of them wouldn't press it anyway. But what I want you to see loud and clear today before we dive any more into Peter's story is there is a person, there is one who is seated on a chair, and it's a throne in heaven. And it's the only chair, by the way, that counts. And he's already declared to you, I want you. The only one who has the power to give us the approval has already given it to you fully and freely. I'm going to preach to you over here. No, you're pity clapping. You're pity clapping over here. There's one person over here coming to you. Peter wasn't the first person though, right? This is what God told the prophet Jeremiah in the Old Testament. He said, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Right? Before you were born, I set you apart, and I chose and appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Before you ever did anything, God had his sights set on you, and he gave you a new identity, and he changed your name, and he sees something in you. And so may you hear today from heaven, from the throne that matters, before you were born, before you breathed, before you had an opportunity to show up or even to screw up, God declared to you, I want you. You're mine, my son, my daughter. You belong to me. I've chosen you. So the grand announcement from heaven today that you all need to know is that your audition has been canceled. You don't need to prove anything to anybody because God loves you so much. And he chooses you, well, not blindly and sight unseen like these judges. He chooses you, knowing you inwardly and intimately, knowing exactly who you are right now and why you are the way you are and where you are today, and knowing exactly what you're going to do in the future, the best of you in the future and the worst of you. And he still says, new name, you're mine. I want you. What a great God we have. And yet, in spite of that new name and new identity that we didn't deserve or earn, there's still times that we fail God. We fail to live up to that new name. Adam Hamilton, who I quoted earlier, said in his book, how could Jesus call Simon a rock? After all, this man is going to blow it consistently. He'll be less like a rock and more like a reed or blade of grass, easily moved, swayed, or broken, and he'll miss the point again and again and again. After Jesus named him Peter, he actually said, follow me in that same story. And Peter did. Peter immediately followed Jesus. That was the sort of guy that Peter was. Like he was an outspoken, natural-born leader, and he had courage to do things that others didn't. And in any list of disciples' names, no matter where they're listed in the Bible, you will always see Peter's name mentioned first. This guy got it right a lot of times, where he lived up to his name. Out of all the disciples, he was the only one that had the courage to jump out of the boat and actually did walk on water towards Jesus for a time. How cool is that? There's another story where I thought, man, he's really living up to his new name and his new identity in this moment. And it's in Matthew chapter 16, where tensions now are rising between the Jewish leaders and Jesus. And so Jesus takes the disciples to the region of Caesarea Philippi and takes them to the side and asks this question. In the midst of all this turmoil going on, he says, who do people say that I am? His disciples said, well, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, some Jeremiah, one of the other prophets. And he looked at his disciples and said, but who do you say that I am? And of course, the rock stood up. Peter said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, the Messiah. And Jesus was pleased with that answer. He said, yeah, Peter, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for you are Peter, and it is on this rock that I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, the gates of hell, will not prevail against it. And Peter, I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And so whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. This was a time where Peter got it so right. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. This is the rock that he was called to be. And Jesus said, yes. And it's on that specific question, on that specific confession, that I will build my church. And Peter, I'm giving you the keys. I'm giving you the inaugural leadership position in what would be known as the church. Peter, you will be the very first pastor of the church. And the church is the thing that Jesus came to establish until he comes back. The church is the physical and visible embodiment of Jesus in this world. Think about what a high calling this is. In that moment, he got it so right. And as he was following after Jesus for these 3.5 years, these 12 disciples, he was also on this inner three, Peter, James, and John, that got even special access to Jesus and got invited into things that nobody else got invited into. I think you can make the case that perhaps there's no human in the history of human beings that got more access and time with Jesus, that Jesus invested in, entrusted, empowered, and called in this powerful, powerful way. And I needed you to see all of that, all that Jesus had done for this man, plucking him out of obscurity. Because now it's time we come to when Peter is reclining at a table, and it's the Last Supper. And Jesus says, one of you will betray me and sell me to my death, but another will deny even knowing me. And it's in that moment that Peter stands up boldly and says, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. That's what you would expect from the rock. I won't budge. By the way, Peter has a way of, when he's standing up for Jesus, throwing all his friends under the bus. Even if all these jokers do, I won't. Peter had a spiritual gift of speaking, didn't he? And then Jesus said, truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows, Peter, you'll disown me 3 times. Peter God, even more bolder, even if I have to die with you, I'll never disown you. All the other disciples said the same. I'll die before I deny. It's what you would expect from the rock. And yet this big boulder, sadly in history, is most known for big blunders, for the night when this came to fruition. It's actually recorded in all 4 of the Gospels. I like Luke's rendition of it. He says, then seizing Jesus, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. Those words are really important, by the way. Peter followed at a distance. When we follow Christ at a distance, that's when things can get out of hand really quickly. The invitation to follow Jesus is not a follow me at a distance. It's a come so close to me. And when you can't get close enough to me, I'll come close to you. But when we start finding ourselves away from Christ, that's when really the crap can hit the fan. And when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight, and she looked closely at him and said, this man was with him, but he denied it. Woman, I don't know him, he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, you also are one of them. Man, I am not, Peter replied. And about an hour later, another asserted, certainly this fellow was with him, for he's a Galilean. Peter replied, man, I don't know what you're talking about. And just as he was speaking, just as Jesus said, the rooster crowed. And Luke records this detail. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. So think about it. The first moment that Jesus met Peter, he looked and turned at Peter and said boldly, passionately, I want you. But now in a moment when his friend needed anybody and should have especially been able to count on the one, the rock that he had entrusted and empowered and believed in, what is Peter saying to Jesus? I don't want you. In fact, I don't even know you. Really, Peter? That's how you're going to treat Jesus? Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you'll disown me 3 times. And what did Peter do? He went outside and wept bitterly. The rock, the right-hand man of Jesus, was nowhere to be found. I'm struck by the lack of courage in a man that God had done so much for. Especially from Peter, right? This was the guy we said earlier, jumped out of the boat when no one else did. This is the guy that, I know he went too far, but cut off a servant's ear in order to defend Jesus in like a chapter earlier. Right? This is the guy that can stand up and speak at any time, at any moment. So we would expect, of course, this guy's going to stand up for Jesus. And here he is in the denials, crumbling in front of one little servant girl. Like, what happened? Why would Peter do this? I don't doubt Peter's intention that when he said, even if all the others fall away, I never will, and I'll never deny you. Even if I have to die, I'll stand by your side. Like, I think Peter genuinely wanted to be that man. And I think sometimes when God comes into our life and his grace is so good to us, we genuinely want to be the best version of ourselves that we can be to give God glory. But sometimes the weight of the world comes crashing down upon us, sometimes expectantly and sometimes unexpectedly, and we choose what feels good in the moment, but will leave us absolutely empty afterward. And that is what sin does. Sin, we wouldn't do it if it didn't, guys. It feels good in the moment, but it leaves us empty after. And as we said earlier, like, sin can be a loaded term. Like, one of the worst things you could say to somebody, most offensive things, and I'm not saying you should say this and be this type of person that goes around saying this, is, you're a sinner. But I, especially as Christians, like, I wonder why that's so offensive for us to hear. Because what it really means, like, when you think about it, it's not that shocking that I would be called and you would be called a sinner. Some of you know the definition of sin comes from an old archery term meaning to miss the mark. And so if you picture a dartboard, I had a dartboard in my basement when I was growing up. If bullseye is the target you're supposed to hit, anything outside of bullseye is considered sin. And so that means the times when I was never very good at darts that I would try to hit bullseye and it like went into the drywall of my parents' basement. Like, that's sin, I really missed. But even the one that's like one dot off of bullseye, that's so close, that's sin. And the standard we're called to hit every time is bullseye. And you're thinking, well, that seems like an impossible standard to attain to. And that's exactly my point. It is. We will all fall short. We will all miss the mark. Sometimes we'll miss it by a little bit, and sometimes we'll miss it by a lot. But the last thing that we should do in this room as Christians, for those of us who would call ourselves Christians, is act like we're fully put together and everything is perfect in our life. Now, here's where things get difficult. If sin is missing the mark, those who haven't signed up to follow Jesus have a different idea of what the standards or what the marks are that they're called to hit than we do who are pursuing after Jesus. And so we can't, as Christians, always expect non-Jesus followers to try to hit the marks we're trying to hit. Does that make sense? Sometimes, like, I'm not saying, by the way, that we should ever celebrate the marks and standards that non-Christians have, or that we ever need to compromise our morals or values or the mark and standard that we should be attaining to. But sometimes it does get muddy when we hold non-Christians accountable to marks that they never signed up to follow in the first place. But I think, honestly, if they were, for a second, thinking about this, even if they have a different set of standards and marks, I think all of us not only fall short of God's glory and what He wants, but I know this is true about myself. I often fall short of my own standards and what I want. And I think we all do. Like, if you're like me, you've been trying to become a better version of yourself for how long now? Right? And it's like I'm 38 years old. Why am I still struggling with the sins of my childhood at times? Why am I still wrestling with the same issue that I thought I overcame 10 years ago? And yet, even knowing what God has done and how He's given me a new name and called me before I did anything and just absolutely loves me and invites me to follow after Him, after all of this grace, there's still like these lies and this twisted version of reality in my head that thinks if I just become a better person, if I just get things right here, and I don't know what yours just is, maybe if I just keep improving or get a better job or become wealthier, then everything will be great. But I want to tell you some truth today, that your best version of yourself, it'll never be good enough for God, and I guarantee you it won't even fully satisfy you. You will find something about yourself that you don't like. I'm saying you can have the high-rise office job and cash falling out your pockets and a six-pack of abs and a souped-up Tesla and a beautiful mansion and kids that lead the National Honor Society, and you will still find something you hate about yourself. There are many that have done and climbed that ladder that it is lonely without Christ. And they're still not experiencing freedom that God wants them to have. And the last thing we should do when we come together as a church is act like we're good and we have no issues. I was talking with a couple of couples here at King of Kings a couple of weeks ago, and they talked about how, for whatever reason, Sunday mornings are like the time when their family gets into the knockdown, drag-out arguments. And I don't know if it's like, hey, we're leaving at this time and someone's late again, or maybe it's someone's been in the bathroom too long and so that's why I'm late. I know you can never relate to any of this, but they're getting in their car and the argument's coming with them and they're frustrated and they're yelling and they're angry, and the moment they're on Center and Pacific, they're still angry, but the moment they turn onto 116th and I and pull into the King of Kings parking lot and close those doors, they come out and they're all buttoned up and smiling and shaking hands and kissing babies and how you doing? Blessed to be a blessing, highly favored. I told him the only way to avoid those things on Sunday, those fights, is to join ministry where you get up hours before your family and don't have to deal with any of it. But I've been around church long enough, and I've known myself long enough to know that we all bring some issues in with us. And rather than denying them, let's bring them to the God that can do something about them. He's been too good for us, too good to us, to settle for this bandaged, hobbled, broken down, shadow at best representation that many of us are giving. He's worth more than that. And so as we're in scars, and we're using it as an acronym, but also a metaphor, I believe today is like rip the Band-Aid off Sunday. It's gonna be a little painful. It's not always gonna be easy, But we need to get down into that wound and let God do what God does and bring healing. And here's the truth, like, I can see your Band-Aid. You can see mine. We're not fooling each other. And so today where I want us to get to is this line. And so this is the line I want you to remember. If you tweet this. If you still have a MySpace page, you can throw it on there. It says, the admission price into freedom begins with an admission of your sin. And so we put little Admit One bookmarks on your chairs to help you remember this. You can follow along with your Forgiving Challenge books. But I want you to know today that you'll never be free if you can't admit your weaknesses, mistakes, and ways in which you've missed the mark. And if you think I'm being hard on you and picking on you, let me go ahead and start and say to you, my name is Zehnder, and I'm a sinner. And sometimes I miss the mark, and I don't even intend to, and it's just really little and minor, and it's like, Other times I miss the mark badly. Sometimes those are intentional, and I hate that I do that. Sins that I've either dealt with or maybe still am dealing with in my past or maybe even still in my present are greed. Why do I want the things of the world more than the things of God sometimes at this stage in my life? Lusting after the things of this world. Why can't I be satisfied with what God's given to me? Pride. And alongside of that is wrongful comparison. Can't I just be content in my own skin with who God's made me to be and celebrate others when God's doing great things and not have to compare myself to them? At times, probably the harshest for me is when I start thinking about, Zach, you can write about how to follow Jesus, and you can even speak about how to follow Jesus. But why can't you do the things that you write about and the things that you say? Why are there seasons of your life where you burn hot for me and you, in all things considered, do great things for me, and then other seasons where you are apathetic and indifferent? Like, how in the world can I ever be indifferent about God at this stage of my life after all I've seen God do? It's stupid. And why is it that on a spiritual gift test that mercy is at the very bottom? That sucks. After how merciful God has been to me, that's a struggle for me to be merciful to someone else? Are you kidding? So here's what I'm saying about this, is the last thing I want from you is to affirm me and accept me for who I am today. Please don't. Because I hope this version that you see isn't the best that you get from me. I want to grow. I want to get better. I want to be more effective, not because I have to, but because I want to. I want to live up to the name God's called me to. I want you to live up to the name that God's called you to. I want to give my best to a God who's given me his best. And so the last thing you should say to me is, Zach, you're perfect the way that you are, when I'm not. Now, you don't got to be mean to me all the time, right? I mean, food is my love language, and right after that is words of affirmation, right? So, like, I accept salty snacks with good things said about me. Like, I still like that. But please don't tell me I'm perfect, because I'm not, and I'm not okay with who I am. I hope you love me enough and grow to love me enough to not accept that this is the best that you're going to get. And I hope that our relationship grows and that I can love you enough to say to you today that why in the world would I settle for that version there? When you can be so much more and can live out of so much more freedom, and after how good God has been to you, don't you want that? Not to earn anything, but simply because He's worthy. And so, you're not perfect. You're a mess up. You brought a lot of stuff in here with you today. You don't believe me? Come back next week and you will see it for yourself. And again, I do not say any of this to condemn you, but I am okay convicting you. Because while God gives you a name and gives it to you before you did anything, God loves you for who you are, but his love doesn't leave you as you are. And I want all of us to grow and be greater followers of Jesus because he's that good. So a lot of us would say, well, gosh, if Jesus did all that for Peter, if he did all that for me, like I would have never denied. Yes, you would. He's done just as much for you, right? Don't you know that? We're on this side of the cross, this side of the resurrection after Jesus descended into hell and was completely forsaken and then rose again. We're on this side. We know it happened. We believe it happened. And on this side, we know that God has not only called us home eternally to be with him forever, but invited us into the opportunity of a lifetime to follow after him and bring his kingdom down into this earth. He's entrusted it to us, empowered it to us, believed in us, called us, and given it to us. And so don't tell me God hasn't done enough for you. And so here's what I want you to see. Every one of us missed the mark. And you say, Zach, this is uncomfortable. I didn't want you to get in my business like this. You're not supposed to bring my sin to light. Who says? You know, one of the metaphors for a pastor that's given oftentimes, and it is for our main man Peter as well, is shepherd. David, another shepherd, would say, all of us like sheep have gone astray. And by the way, that is not a compliment. I don't know if you've ever met a sheep, but they are not the wisest animal in the world. They are the dumbest animal in the world. And they absolutely rely on the shepherd's leadership. And I need you to know, by the way, that before I am one of your shepherds, I am also a sheep first. I've been bad. And that was a bad joke. But you have too. You have too. And somehow, in some way, God put me here as one of your shepherds. And I think the best thing I can do as one of your shepherds is just lead you back to Jesus. Lead you back into the man who's loving and gracious and kind. So I want you to see that you're broken, but I want you to see that in your brokenness you have somewhere to go to be completely healed. And that as great as your sin is, Jesus is greater. As big as your shame is, Jesus' grace is stronger. So yeah, God's chosen you, called you, empowered you, entrusted you, and that's good news. You will fail. That's bad news. But it's what you do in that failure and mistake that will determine whether you actually live out of freedom or not. And the first step to freedom is to see our need for it. Again, I'll repeat the phrase from a little bit earlier. The admission price into freedom begins with an admission of your sin. But I don't just want to convict you today. I want to encourage you. And here's the encouragement, that any failure is simply an opportunity to fall into the grace of Jesus again. Because while sin ends a lot of stories that we might write in this world, God doesn't write stories that end in sin. God doesn't write stories that end badly, and he'll just ensure that even if someone else tells you your story is over or you're done, or even if the person that's telling you that is yourself, that God could never use someone like me after all that I've done. Are you kidding me? This message is for somebody else. No, it's not. This message is for you, and God will keep writing a new chapter if you allow him. So last week I mentioned that we're going to be camping out in John 21. It's the 89th gospel chapter. And so we're going to look deeply into those verses next week. But today I want to share with you just the first 4 words. Are you ready to hear them? No, you're not. That was terrible. Awful, awful, awful. I forgive you. I have to forgive because it's about forgiving. So Lord, make me gracious. In chapter 89, we're going to see the love and grace of Jesus so powerfully move in a man that totally failed him when he needed someone the most. We're going to see the grace of Jesus restore, forgive, and love, and give him a second chance. It's so great. I can't wait to get into it. But it's the first 4 words that got me a little excited today. So are you ready to hear them? Yeah. That was a little better. All right, come on, stand up on your feet, because some of you might just like dance a little. You might dance a little. Classic Grace, Leroy said, we might get the urge to liturge a little bit after this. So you think I'm bad with puns and cheesy? I get it from Leroy. But here's the first 4 words that are so beautiful. After all of this, afterward, Jesus appeared again. That's it right there. That's the gospel. That's the gospel. That our God will never stop showing up. Think about this. This is after the cross and after the resurrection. Like he's already paid the price for Peter eternally. But now is where he's going to really show him individually. Don't just wait for eternity to get back to where I called you to be, to get back to where I originally named you, to get back to the calling I placed on your life. This is the story where Jesus shows up on the shore and gives Peter another opportunity. And that's the beauty of this God that we have is, yes, we can acknowledge that we are sinful and we can come back to Jesus, but the greatest news of all is he's already come to us first. We have a God who initiates. We have a God who doesn't wait for us to clean up our mess. We have a God who's okay with our arguments on Pacific and Center Street as we come into church. We have a God who postures himself to hear. And so hear these words today. You thought sin would be the end, but our God appears again. My sin will not be the end, for my God comes again and again and again. He will show up even when I mess up. And I am not a mess up. Because my story is not over. And so, God, we thank you for who you are. We thank you for grace upon grace upon grace upon grace. And we thank you, God, that in the midst of all that you've done, empowered and trusted, believed and called, that after all of that, when we fail, your grace never runs out. It is endless. There is no sin that you have done that is too big that Jesus has not already paid for. There is no sin that would bring you out of the scope of God writing another chapter in your story. And so today, if you're ready to admit, I am a sinner and I am in need of God's grace, would you just lift your hands in this place right now? Come on, if you want freedom, it starts with you admitting, I am a sinner. I miss the mark. I miss it by a little bit of times. I miss it by a lot of times. And I will not be ashamed of that any longer. And I will not let the devil lie to me any longer and tell me that just because of what I've done, that I am done. I am not done because my God is not done. My God writes new chapters. My God shows up for me, and he will never stop showing up. And so, God, break us down in this place today, for it's in the breakdown where we get the breakthrough. We need you, Lord, now more than ever. And so come on, church, let's sing to God and let's praise this God. He is here right now, and he won't stop now. He's going to keep coming.